Okay, so today we're going to talk about the scientific revolution. This is chapter 8, section 1. So let's look at the final authorities on knowledge. This was one of your homework questions. And prior to the 1500s, we're looking at ancient scholars that the Catholic Church has deemed the authority on certain areas of knowledge. So we have ancient Greek and Roman thinkers. You have Aristotle here listed, presenting us with a geocentric theory. And for the church, they are going to incorporate ancient Greek Roman thinkers that they believe fit in with their teachings of the Bible. You have the idea of how our human anatomy will work. Well, they're not looking at the human body. They are not dissecting the bodies because that's actually considered a sin. It goes against the church, and doing so will get you thrown into prison. So they're dissecting animals like pigs to determine how the human body works. And again, this is prior to the 1500s, and really it's not going to be until roughly about the 1700s that we really start to see the dissection of the human body and understanding how our human body works. The Bible, that is another authority on knowledge, and that again is coming from the Roman Catholic Church. Christian doctrine is to be incorporated into scientific teachings, or scientific teachings are being incorporated into Christian doctrine, that the Bible holds the ultimate authority on knowledge, and everything has to fit within the Bible. Even if it doesn't make sense from what you visually see happening in the world, it has to somehow plug into the Bible. The Catholic Church in the medieval times had a strong hold over society. They controlled the monarchs, they controlled the education, and everything that was flowing within the church was used to make sure that they maintained their authority over society. So when we look at science, again, it is the church's influence and what is to be taught and how it's to be taught that shows their authority over what is going on in our world. But then there's going to be another age that comes about, and it's going to be the Renaissance, and that age is going to challenge all of it. So let's talk a little bit about the Renaissance. So the Renaissance comes after the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. So after we've dealt with the plague, the Black Death, and it's still happening. It's just during the Middle Ages, the amount of people that were killed, that had died, just devastated society. I mean, even to the point where the peasants, the people who were tied to the land and tied to nobles, were able to use the fact that so many people had passed away to their advantage to try to get better working conditions. And it did work in their favor for a while. We had the 100 Years' War that lasted for actually 116, and that was a war between France and Great Britain, or England at the time. It wasn't Great Britain at the moment, but France and England over territory that is on the continent of Europe and really falls within the holding of the French Empire. That conflict devastated not only France, but it devastated England and France's economic system. I mean, when you're fighting a war, when your nation's fighting a war for 116 years, that's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cost you a lot of lives too. And so we start to see a shift in these countries during that time. But the Renaissance is going to take place originally down in Italy. So Italy brings us the Renaissance, and then eventually it will spread to the rest of Europe, but it's going to take a little different flair when it leaves Italy. So with our Renaissance, we see the key component to the Italian Renaissance, and even in Northern Renaissance too, is humanism. And when I think of the Renaissance, and particularly how it applies to everything else that we're studying this year, it's like the Renaissance is this umbrella, and then you have this rain cloud that comes over, and that's humanism, and all the raindrops that come out is going to help these flowers grow down here at the bottom of our screen. So humanism has 6 characteristics. And one, it's to study the works of classical Greek and Roman writers. And really, when you look at these 6 characteristics, these are the cool things to do. You want to be able to quote classical writers and their works. You want to imitate the way that they would write and model after them, because that was the way that you could show off your knowledge and brag about yourself. Although it's not cool to brag about yourself in the Renaissance, everyone should just know that you are that amazing. We are to glorify human potential and achievements. We are to celebrate humanity, what we can do. In the Middle Ages, that was a no-no. That was a sin. The Catholic Church frowned down upon that, and people would not accept that type of behavior. So when you look at the artwork in the Middle Ages, it's more about the church, about God, about angels. When you get to the Renaissance, you're going to still see artwork that deals with the church, but you're also going to see the people who paid for those pieces of art to have their face as on the paintings with the characters in those works. Pope Alexander VI, he had multiple children, and with the works that he had commissioned, this is the Borgia family, he would have classical artwork commissioned, and with the gods and goddesses, he had his face along with his children's faces painted. Or biblical scenes, they would have their faces painted on those paintings. So when you look at Renaissance art, you are truly looking at the people from that time period. Optimism, being optimistic about life. Live life to the fullest. Enjoy what's out there. Going through the Dark Ages, going through the time of the plague and the 100 Years' War, the doom and gloom. And that's really what the church was preaching at that time, that life on earth is supposed to be horrible. You are being punished for your sins. And then when you die, things get better in heaven. Well, in the Renaissance, they were like, no, this is our life. Let's enjoy it. Let's have fun. My goodness. We had people who survived the plague. Let's live on. And when you get to the Italian Renaissance, everyone embraced being optimistic. Not only the commoners, but also the people in the church, which is why in the Northern Renaissance, outside of Italy, there's going to be a clash, because the countries outside of Italy felt that the Italians went a little too far with living life to the fullest, including the popes. Encouragement of education. You can thank the humanists in the Renaissance for all of those different classes that you had to sign up for your freshman year. Science, history, languages, your literature class, your math class, your gym classes, your art classes. The humanists during the Renaissance felt that you needed, and all people needed, to be well-rounded individuals. And so education really exploded during this time. And again, it was the cool thing to do. You wanted to be popular, so you needed to be well-rounded in your education. This was for men and women. However, there were limitations placed on what women could do. You needed to have a range of skills. Not only were you to be, high in your academics, but you were also supposed to be athletic. So guys, you were supposed to be great swordsmen and be able to ride your horses. You were supposed to be sensitive to the arts. So men were supposed to be the creators of the arts, and women were supposed to be the inspiration of the arts. And at any time, at any kind of gathering, ladies, we should be able to recite poems or even sing a tune or play some kind of instrument. Now, the part that I find kind of funny is moral integrity is placed here. And I can tell you, when you study the Italian Renaissance, it was really the period of assassinations, what was really going on in Italy during that time, that you should have moral integrity, that you should be above reproach, that you should go for the higher ground and do what was best for your city-state or your nation, that you should have a civic duty and participate politically and to know what was going on within your society. Yet when you look at the Medici family, they ruled Florence. You didn't cross that family, because if you did, you ended up dead. And it was public execution, and people got the message that you don't mess with the Medici family. And you need to be courageous. So if there is a war, if there's a dispute between your nation and another, you're going to be there to defend your nation, to defend your city, state, or your country's honor, along with your family. Another characteristic, search for new knowledge through close observation of nature. That ties us directly into the scientific revolution and the age of exploration. So here you have this idea that, observe what's going on around you, observe what God had created, and embrace it, understand it. And that's what we're going to look at here in the scientific revolution and throughout the rest of our units. We are going to observe. That observation, that studying classical works, celebrating our human potentials, coming up with a well-rounded education is actually going to backfire. Because in Italy, the Catholic Church is strongly supporting humanism. They're wanting the wealthy to be highly educated because this is not a movement for the lower classes. They do not have the time nor the money to spend to participate in this movement. And then we get our sixth characteristic, search for principles of law and government for the new nation states. Well, this is going to be a problem for our monarchs, kings and queens, princes that control principalities. Because now through this education, through opening our minds and embracing all of these ideas, we're going to discover that the works of the classics, contradict some of the teachings that they've been telling us to always follow. That they were picking and choosing certain works for people to study and for people to listen to. And now we're going to uncover that not everyone agreed. So in past times, there was this thing called democracy. It wasn't full-on democracy. It was limited. Why aren't we practicing that if we're trying to become like the ancient Greek and Roman people? Why don't we have participation? Why is the church telling us to study this person and ignore another? So this is where we start to see these little flowers sprout up. The age of exploration, the Reformation, where the church will be challenged based on their biblical teachings, on the teachings of the Bible. The scientific revolution, where the church and science will be challenged on what they're presenting as facts and what needs to be ignored. The age of enlightenment is going to sprout from these principles of law and government for new nation states. The idea that we are well-rounded individuals and we are educated. What's the role of people in society and their government? What's the role of women and men? What should be done with children in the schools? What should be done with our prison systems? Should they be torture chambers, as in the Middle Ages? Should those things continue on? Revolutions will start to sprout from these ideas. And that's going to take us clear up to modern day because we will still see this idea of humanism and the ideas from the Enlightenment and then what stems from the scientific revolution, this questioning and challenging authority and knowledge. We still see it present in 2020. So the causes of the scientific revolution, and I'm guessing that for that question, many of you only gave me maybe one or two answers. And you're going to see that I have quite a bit. So whenever you see something that says causes, you need to give me more than one because this is plural. I'm going to suggest you give me probably about 3. Give me 3 causes to be on the safe side because I tend to use causes as part of extended response questions where you have to elaborate further than just giving me a bullet. So let's look here, the Renaissance. We've definitely addressed how the Renaissance is a cause of the scientific revolution. It inspired that curiosity. It encouraged through the characteristics of humanism for us to observe and study nature. Through the discoveries of classical manuscripts, which is part of the Renaissance. I mean, they're wanting us to embrace ancient Greece and Roman writers and their works. Well, they didn't exactly discover the classical manuscripts. In 1453, when the Ottoman Turks took over Constantinople, a lot of Greek scholars wrapped up the manuscripts and fled to Italy. So they were there in Italy. I mean, they weren't hiding them. They were there. They were being protected in Italy from the Ottoman Turks. So now it's being encouraged that, hey, let's start to read them. Let's start translating them. And it's through the reading of these classical manuscripts that they started to realize, wait a minute, Aristotle presented us the geocentric theory, but this scholar is talking about something called the heliocentric theory. So we have two different views of the universe and what is the center of the universe. Why have we always been told to follow Aristotle and not this individual over here that says the heliocentric theory? What's the church trying to hide? What's science trying to hide? And so people are now starting to question. And they start to question that accepted knowledge because they're thinking, okay, so through my observations, I don't see what Aristotle has said. I'm seeing a little bit more like this other individual on the other side with that heliocentric theory. The printing press. Now, this invention pretty much set the world on fire. So prior to the printing press, if you wanted a book, a copy of a book, you had to find someone, particularly if you're looking for an ancient book, a classical book, you needed to find someone who could read Greek or Latin. You needed someone who could read it, translate it, and sit down for a very long time, and I'm talking about months to years, to copy the book for you. And if they messed up, then they had to start over again on that page because they are using ink of some nature. So now we have this invention called the printing press, Gutenberg's printing press. And this is very, think about what we have in the schools with our copy machines. We are able to bring out a lot of paper pages at a time. I mean, the reading, I uploaded a PDF of the textbook. That didn't take me any time at all. So now I can have a lot of copies. And that's what this printing press is going to allow us to do. We're going to be able to spread these new ideas. We're able to not only spread the ideas that we're uncovering in these manuscripts, but when people are going to write about them, we can make copies of their words too and send them out to a lot of people. And we're also going to make sure that these books are written or translated into the vernacular, the language that we speak. So for us at this time, I'm speaking in English, American version of English. So I would have books in my common language. That allows more people to be able to read it, to interpret it for themselves. And for some people, when we look at Martin Luther and he realizes the lower classes can't read, you make pictures. They can figure out a picture, particularly political cartoons that are making fun of certain groups of people. So now that we're starting to see people reading and interpreting information for themselves, they're starting to become critical. They're starting to question, well, why are we not doing it this way? Why are we looking at a world where we talk about, bringing back some of the lives of the ancient times and there's democracy, but we have a king? Can we not make a few changes? Can we not bring in a constitution of some sort? We're also looking at there are certain laws. There are certain laws of nature. There are rights of man. Are those not protected? So we definitely start to become very critical about what's going on in our society. And through this invention, we have faster bookmaking, we advances in learning, and increases in literacy. Now, if you want to continue to have someone copy the book by hand, feel free to do so. It's just going to cost you a lot of money. But now for the stuff that's coming through the printing press, it's also going to be cheaper. And that gets more books, more works in people's hands, and more people reading and questioning. The age of exploration. So we have some countries that are definitely competing, and two of those countries will be Spain and Portugal. At this time, they are some of our top nations, and eventually they're going to lose their power, and other countries are going to rise to power. But when you look at the age of exploration in these countries that are trying to gain territory and resources, you need to have explorers who have navigational instruments that can benefit them. So countries and monarchs and governments start to put more money, emphasis into researching in astronomy and mathematics. You want cartographers. You want people who can help your explorers get to these long off places to gather resources and claim land for your nation. And chances are your monarch had to work with the Catholic Church to get the stamp of approval, because they're going to say you have to convert people once you get there. Now that you have our scientists looking more closely at the world around them, you have explorers doing the same thing. And what they discover is that what they are witnessing, what they're experiencing in this world, it doesn't match ancient beliefs. You know, when the ships set off to sail, and at one time they thought that the world was flat, well, when Magellan's crew, part of his crew was able to completely circumnavigate, sail around the globe, it's not flat. It's circular. So they're able to discover that this stuff doesn't match up, or that there's some big crazy sea monster out there, some big Leviathan that's going to swallow your ship in. Not there. So they're definitely seeing that things do not match up with what ancient times had told them. And through exploration, they are encountering other cultures and sharing knowledge. I mean, China, with their age of exploration, they were venturing out not to take from other lands, but to show how amazing their nation was. Unfortunately, some of those countries did not forget all of the greatness that came with the Chinese explorers. And later on, they're going to want to venture back into China and get a hold of it to start to strip them of their resources. So let's look here at a couple of the scientists. And I want to emphasize that when we look at the scientific revolution, yes, we're going to talk about some of the scientists during the time and the things that they did. But I really want you to, take a hold of the big picture, the fact that we are starting to think about all of this knowledge, that we are educating ourselves. And now we're starting to see that there's a difference between what we're being told and what is really happening. And we start to challenge, not only in science, but we'll challenge with religion, and we're going to challenge with every aspect of society, even how the economy should function. So Copernicus is actually going to be one of our earlier scientists. So he is during the time when we're not going to have a lot of instruments, and it's more about let's read these classical texts, let's observe. And he was one of those scientists who discovered, or he was an astronomer, who discovered that there were ancient scholars who didn't agree with Aristotle and his geocentric theory, that there were some scholars who actually looked more at the heliocentric theory. And so Copernicus, for 25 years, documented his observations, and he concluded that the sun was the center of the universe. Now, Copernicus, as a member of the clergy within the Catholic Church, knew that he had to be very careful. You don't challenge the church. You don't push out information that says this is a fact. So if he's going to present his idea, and he does have a book that's written, it is presented strictly as a theory. And to make sure that the church did not come after him, he did not have it published until his death. So they could question his works, and they could talk about how it's just a theory, he was just writing some craziness in this book. But he didn't straight out challenge them and say, no, this is fact. But others will take his works and look at what they call either the heliocentric theory or the Copernican theory of the universe and start to question and dissect his ideas. One of those people is Kepler. He's a mathematician, and he's going to use mathematics to prove and disprove different aspects of the heliocentric theory. And as we go through the different scientists, you start with Copernicus. He's observation. We bring in Kepler, who brings in mathematics. And then we have others who are going to build upon the mathematics and then create experiments and analytical geometry and using instruments. And so we continuously build up the different steps that these scientists are going to do, and they're constantly searching for the truth and an understanding of the way the universe works. Now, one thing that will help some of the scientists is where are they located? And when we get through that age of the Reformation, and that was something that hopefully you studied your freshman year, during your 7th grade year, when you had the break from the Catholic Church and different Protestant churches started to form, different denominations, in some of these states, these nations outside of Italy, you have Protestant kings and queens. And within those countries, the scientists would be protected. The Catholic Church is the one that's really coming after these ideas that the scientists are presenting. And so if you have a monarch who is willing to protect you, then it's okay with what you publish, as long as the monarch is benefiting from what you're putting out there, particularly making their universities popular and more people coming in and paying money to be taught by you at their school. France was a strong Catholic nation, but they had kings who made sure the church understood there is a separation of church and state, that the king makes decisions and the church monitor all religious aspects. Descartes and Bacon are two men where we start to look at their ideas and how they fit together as a scientific method. So Bacon is going to be our first one that we look at with the scientific method, and then we bring in Descartes. So with Bacon, we're having this idea of experimentation, that you need to experiment. You need to have a logical process for gathering information, testing ideas, and searching for truth. You do the scientific method in your science classes. Descartes is going to present us with this idea that we need to doubt everything, believe nothing. The Middle Ages taught us to accept everything by faith. Don't use your brain. If the church or your king or queen tells you that the sky is green, then it's green. If they tell you that 2 + 2 = 5, then it's 5. But our scientists in the scientific revolution and Descartes and Bacon are telling us, you know what? You actually have a brain. Use it. God gave you the ability to reason. Use it. If you are questioning what they're telling you, research, gather evidence, gather your ideas, test it, go through a logical process, a step-by-step process to determine what is true. Pinch yourself. You can feel it. Descartes says that's the only thing you know for certain is that you exist. Doubt everything. Question everything until it can be proven and you accept that as proof. So when you look at the scientific revolution, it does become a clash between the church and the science in the world of science. And the scientists will say time and time again, we are not trying to challenge the church. We are trying to understand science. We are trying to understand the world that we live in. We would like, if we find something that proves something else wrong, that everyone could say, oh, okay, let's move on with this new idea in the times. They just proved that that was wrong. But that's not how the Catholic Church is going to handle it at this time. They feel threatened. They feel challenged because now they're being challenged on their authority of knowledge. And throughout the Middle Ages, they have had complete control. They control the kings and queens. They threaten to excommunicate them if they do not follow along with the church, which is telling them that when they die, they will spend eternity burning in hell. And since their education from the time they were little children up through adulthood has always been from the church, the kings and queens believed everything they said. It wasn't until we got into the Reformation when Martin Luther challenged the church, and his challenge of the church wasn't to break the church. It was to get the church to look at abuses and groups of people that he saw as manipulating the system to their own financial advantage. But there were others who were saying, no, we are going to break. There were kings who broke away because they saw that financially and personally, they could have more control over their countries. Henry VIII broke away from the Catholic Church, not because he didn't believe in the Catholic faith. It's because he wanted to divorce one wife and marry another, and the church said no. He wanted to get rid of his first wife, Catherine, to marry Anne Boleyn, because Catherine could not have any more children and he wanted a son. He believed that girls could never rule England. But we know that's not going to be true. So when you look at this break and the church, again, feeling very threatened, first it's knowledge, then it's religion, and now they have no control over the people, including the monarchs. Scientists are disproving accepted knowledge. The church is under attack. What can they do? What can they do to stop this? They aren't willing to admit where maybe, due to the times, that lack of knowledge, that they had agreed that something was accurate when it wasn't. Instead, they said no. Anything that comes out of a Protestant or a scientist that is not supporting what we have always said was accurate, which is the geocentric theory, that Aristotle was accurate, that it fits neat and nice with the Bible, anything that goes against those ideas should be burned. Their works will be burned. They will be put on a list of forbidden books where no Catholic can read them, where people should not read them. Your parents tell you you can't watch something, listen to a certain song, read something. You're probably going to try to find a way to do it. Well, that's exactly what they did then too. So the moment the Catholic Church started to forbid people, you can't read this scientist's works. We're going to bring this person before the Inquisition. We're going to excommunicate this individual. People started to look at them. People wanted to read them. And then they're going to start to challenge even more. The church feared that people would actually start to break away. And when we get into the Enlightenment, they do. So in the scientific stage here in the Reformation, you had people who questioned the Catholic Church, and then they broke away and created what they were considering reformed churches, reformed forms of Christianity. But now that we're in the scientific revolution moving into the Enlightenment, we're going to have people who will become deists, where they believe that yes, there is a God, but a God who doesn't interact with us on earth. And then atheists who will say God doesn't exist at all. So the church is in a state of fear, and they want to maintain their authority, and they're going to do everything in their power to keep it. So this will end our notes on the scientific revolution, and we will see how this plays out through the rest of this unit, because it definitely does create that launching pad for everything else.